Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Cup Duet Reviews. My name is Jillian Robinson. I am the associate producer here at Cup of Hemlock Theatre, and I will be your host for today. And today we are unpacking the phenomenal And Juliet being performed at the Princess of Wales Theatre right now in Toronto. And music and lyrics are by Max Martin and Friends, book by David West Reed. Music supervision, orchestrations, and arrangements by Bill Sherman, choreographer Jennifer Weber, and director Luke Sheppard. And big kudos and bravo to the rest of the crew and cast. Before I get carried away, let's introduce who's here with me today to unpack this concert of a show. I have the phenomenal Ryan Borochovitz, one of our co-artistic producers. How you doing, Ryan?
I'm doing good, Jill. How are you?
I'm good. I'm jazzed. I'm excited. Can you tell?
Yes, I can. I'm jazzed too, which you might not be able to tell as apparently, but yes, I'm excited to talk about this.
Oh, amazing. What's in your cup with us today, Ryan?
Okay, I have water, which I am drinking out of the cup, Cup of Hemlock, because it's important to stay hydrated and stay on brand.
Yes.
How about you?
Today's recording day, it is a warm one out there too, so I support the hydration. I am drinking some tropical punch Kool-Aid in one of my favorite mugs. It's one of my unicorn mugs, and it says "Don't Stop Believing." So picking up on some unicorn imagery we saw today on the stage. Ryan and I actually just came from seeing And Juliet, so this review today is fresh off the page. The stage rather. And Don't Stop Believing, I think, is cheeky because we'll unpack this more, but And Juliet is a jukebox musical, and Don't Stop Believing is a number in Rock of Ages, which is another jukebox musical. So, box musical. Great. So, and then my ensemble, I got some velour going on today, living my best sort of like Spice Girls, 90s Britney life. I have some bubblegum looking earrings, lots of pops of color, which we'll get into, that was glazed upon the stage. I have a little scrunchie going on, my headband, and you can't see, it's not on camera. Those who are listening also can't see any of this, but I have some Adidas sort of sporty spice looking shorts on too. So I'm full on.
You came to play.
I really did. Speaking of play, let's unpack this play, this musical. And I think we'll do what we usually do, Ryan, because this show will be running at the Princess of Wales Theatre until August 14, 2022. So as per usual, Ryan and I are going to talk a little bit about it. And then fear not, we will put up some sort of spoiler symbol so that folks who do want to go see the show and don't want too much leaked, don't worry, we will not spoil without you being warned. But before we dive too far deep, Ryan, do you want to give us maybe a little spiel or backstory or vibe? Or I'm just going to open the floor to you.
Sure. I will start by saying I went into this play knowing almost nothing about it. And I think that was for the better, because if I had known too much, my experience might have been less, not necessarily diminished, but yeah, I would have maybe had less fun with the twists and turns that the story takes. So yeah, I would encourage people, if you do think you might want to see it, it's also a new musical, so there hopefully will have a very interesting and long afterlife beyond this production, which is I believe, this isn't the Canadian premiere. It started in Calgary recently.
It's in Alberta. I can't remember if it's Calgary or Edmonton off the top of my head, but yes, I believe it started at West first before it went to West End. Yeah.
But this is its introduction to Toronto audiences, and hopefully it's on its way to Broadway next or soon. So there will be hopefully many opportunities for people to see this show. So definitely heed that spoiler warning, but then come back after you've seen the show and hear our thoughts in detail. When being someone who went in knowing very little about it, I guess to just try to keep this concise, non-spoiler spiel. This is a jukebox musical, as Jill just said, and it is. How would you describe the period of music that this covers? It's like 90s and early aughts, bubblegum pop, top 40 type.
Yeah.
This is the music you grew up with.
I was going to say, it covers like a swath of like 20 and 30-year-olds today, like in 2022, a swath of like years and genres from but with a heavy cadence on like pop divas and boy band material.
Britney Spears, Backstreet Boys, NSYNC, a lot of Katy Perry. Those
Ariana
vibes.
Grande,
Yeah, those are the kind of vibes you can expect. And like I say, this is the music you grew up with. Technically, I grew up with it too. I fit within this age demographic. But I really, this was not the music of my childhood or adolescence, because like it was playing, it existed on the radio, but like I just, it kind of passed me by while it was all new. I sort of listened to a lot of the stuff that my parents listened to, I guess, a lot of classic rock, a lot of easy listening. And this wasn't necessarily foundational to my identity or musical taste growing up the way that it is for you. So
I can remember even like when I had my license back in high school, I had my old blue Nano that had all of these hits just played on shuffle, like driving into high school and driving.
And you clearly aren't the only one who has a special relationship to it. And I think this is like going to be interesting. Maybe we'll save this for more of the non-spoiler part, but it's very interesting how different relationships to this music maybe affects the way someone might engage with the piece. But we'll put a pin in that for now. So that's the kind of vibe of music that we're going here. All of the songs are pre-existing hits. Some of them have been tweaked in phrasing, but for the most part, they're kept entirely as they are. And the main plot, in case the title, Ampersand Juliet, hasn't given it away, is that this is a bold history remix style for all the Six fans, and that is a frame of reference we might be coming back to periodically, but it is a bold reimagining of Romeo and Juliet that, I'm going to say this, it's not really a spoiler, it's literally the first thing that happens, but it reimagines it from the perspective of what if Juliet didn't kill herself at the end of Shakespeare's famous play, and what if that was just the beginning of her story, and then she goes on to live a whole kind of interesting journey thereafter. And without getting into too much detail, I think that's good on the plot department too. I don't know if you have anything you want to add to it.
A+, sprinkling some glitter and big confetti cannons on that description, Ryan. No, I think you pretty much hit it on the nose. All I know is I was having, I guess I'll share, you kind of went content route. I'll share like vibe route without giving too much away. I was constantly moving and grooving in my seat, and I felt there was such like a lovely and layered story throughout that you had mentioned to me, Ryan, too, like you were pleasantly surprised throughout pivots and turns that the piece sort of presents. And so,
talk about that as we go.
Being able to follow that. And then also at the same time, me personally kind of honestly feeling like I was at a concert. Like, this isn't spoiling either, but if you're into or have been or still are an NSYNC fan, a Backstreet Boy fan, Ariana Grande, Katy Perry, and you just want a one-stop shop concert vibe of all of these pieces and sung by triple threat performers, it is a wild hoot and a half of a show. So I can't suggest it more to definitely get out and see & Juliet if you can.
Yeah, it's very fun. It makes good use of the music it does. It builds a very interesting plot that, as you kind of alluded to, throws some loops in there that you maybe, or at least I will admit, I didn't expect going in. And we'll talk more about the specifics of those post-spoiler. But it is a bit of a wild ride. And I think regardless of if this is your music, so long as you aren't like hostile towards this kind of music, I think you will enjoy the show. Concert vibes is an interesting way you've described it, because while there certainly are some scenes that kind of outwardly direct themselves to the audience like a concert, like, I don't know, I think of things like, Six. Again, that's going to be a big frame of reference here because they're two similar pieces. But that, or song cycle musicals of that kind, I think kind of call to mind more concert, whereas for me, I think I don't want to understate the significance of the plot that this piece has.
I think when I say concert, I more so mean the presentation of it is like, if you nowadays, you go to see a Taylor Swift concert, you go to see a Katy Perry concert, that is more performance than it is a musician on a stage. So to me, that's where I'm getting at when I say concert. Like it is a spectacle of a show in all the right ways. And it's for all ages. I wanted to mention too, definitely for all ages. Ryan and I saw like as young as, I would say probably like 7 or 8 year olds, and as old as like 78-year-old folks. So it can hit every age group. And like Ryan said, as long as you're not hostile fully to music of the 90s and the aughts, and you just have an appreciation for music, talented folks, multiple genres, Shakespeare, this is the show for you for sure.
Shall we?
Shall we? Okay, so we are gonna put up a basically we are now putting up spoiler soiree. So this is a tiny spoiler to announce the spoiler, because there is a soiree or a ball. So right about now you should be seeing a velvet rope. Welcome to the spoiler soiree. VIP spoiler access only. If you so please to escort yourself outside of the spoiler soiree line if you do not want anything spoiled. So welcome to the spoiler soiree. Okay, here we are.
Romeo lives. Yeah, we're not playing games. There are spoilers here. Yeah. End of Act 1 plot twist. Romeo is alive too. Mm-hmm. So, okay, back up a bit. Something I refrained from saying in the plot description is it's not just, oh, we're doing Romeo and Juliet, but what if she decides to not kill herself and survive? There's a meta framing device that overlays a lot of this that I probably could have mentioned in the non-spoiler zone, but I think it was probably best to savor here, because it is framed a bit anachronistically, but framed as if this is the premiere of Romeo and Juliet, as it would have appeared at the Globe in early modern England. And we have characters on stage that represent William Shakespeare and his wife, Anne Hathaway, no relation. So, yeah, we are introduced to this plot from that Anne Hathaway is unhappy with the ending that her husband has written for this piece, and she kind of takes the quill from his hand and rewrites it in a way that she finds more palatable, and that is the play that we are seeing. And throughout the entire piece, the two of them are kind of bickering, interfering. Shakespeare wrests control of it after a certain point. At one point, the quill breaks, and oh no, we can no longer be writing it, and the characters are left up to their own devices, very Pirandello. And yeah, so when I say Romeo lives as this, the end of Act 1 spoiler, that is an interference from our author, i.e. Shakespeare, not the author of the musical. Mm-hmm. Sorry, I went on a bit of a tangent there.
Oh, keep going.
Anything you want to add?
Well, I feel like we'll just keep adding and peppering this in as we go along. But what I really loved about the fact that, this multi-framing device, you sort of are given the first impression that Shakespeare and Anne are going to just rewrite, or they started a certain part of Romeo and Juliet, and the whole show is just going to be them coming on, rewriting, moving on, coming on, rewriting, moving on. But then, yes, like quite literally, there was the device of the quill breaks, and the characters, so Romeo, Juliet, Attell, have their own voices, and, they can, but which was really neat, and this is, again, it was kind of like an excess layer, is there was a really interesting bleed of like the traditional A plot, B plot that I never actually thought that Shakespeare and Anne had full control over these characters, or they had like a full prescribed list of what they wanted these characters to do. And quite literally, Anne has a line at the end saying, I just wanted Juliet to make her own choice. And it's neat. It's like, it wasn't like Anne, as like with a little checkbox saying like, okay, yep, she did that, she did this. Like, she wasn't controlling Juliet. Right. And so that was like a really neat plots, I guess, A plot, B plot. And like, it never was consistent. Like, there would be moments when Anne Hathaway snaps her fingers and says, lights up. Her and Shakespeare come onto the stage. They discuss what's happening next. They go off and the scene proceeds. But then there'd be other moments where, that wasn't the same way that, a break of the show would occur. It would be, Anne would snap her fingers or something. Maybe Will would come on, say something, and then it was very bleedy. It's kind of a weird way of saying it, but and then I think because of that sort of mechanism, it allowed for the plot itself to have so many twists and turns and untraditional pivots. Because again, we can probably go into this whatever, Ryan, but definitely unpacking you saying you were pleasantly surprised multiple times throughout the way. And I would love, as someone who had no idea what this show was about, would you mind sharing what those pleasant surprises were?
So, okay, this might be very unique to my own experience, so take this with a grain of salt, everything I'm about to say, but the show started and kind of for like the first 5 to 10 to 15, I don't know, I wasn't timing it, but minutes, I was pretty sure I was going to hate it, which is not what I went in expecting, but it's hard to kind of explain exactly why, because, you know, I'm not hostile towards this music, even if it's not like the kind of music I listen to in my free time or music I grew up with, so that's not the problem. But just the way the plot was kind of unfolding, I was kind of, you know, for that first big chunk of it was kind of be like, oh, I don't like where this is going. And I think a big part of the reason why is it clearly, I'm struggling to even articulate what I'm thinking here, but it very much frames itself as if it thinks it's very clever, and it is clever. I will give it that, but I don't love when something, you know, flaunts its cleverness, and also when it does that, there's a very slippery slope of thinking you're more clever than you are, and that was kind of how I felt about this whole break from the framing device into the plot proper. That it kind of like, for context, I hate the movie Deadpool. Minority opinion, but like I hate Deadpool, and people are like, oh, you like meta stuff, you'd probably be all over that. But no, because that's a movie that says, isn't it so clever that we're being meta? It's a movie, and yet I'm breaking the fourth wall like Woody Allen did 30 years ago. Like it's patting itself on the back in this very like self-serving congratulatory way for doing things that aren't really that clever, and also having lacking substance, because, you know, you're sitting on your laurels of just being clever without actually having done anything clever, or in the absence. But you know what I actually like a lot? Deadpool 2. Which I wasn't expecting to like Deadpool 2, but then it was kind of, okay, we've gotten over the fact that we're very clever for doing this very simple thing, and actually told a much better, more interesting, and actually funnier story than the first one. And much like that, I actually started enjoying and Juliet a lot more, maybe like about 15 minutes in. And what actually I think started making me turn around was we got, you mentioned B-plot a moment ago, we got invested in side characters a little more. Like, and I think the actual moment where I'm like, okay, maybe there's something here, and then kind of just exponentially started enjoying it more as we went, was we had the song, what's it? Yeah, it's the I'm Not a Girl, I'm Not Yet a Woman, sung by May. And that was like, okay, wow, this is actually like good. I'm getting invested in the side characters here. And specifically May, who's first introduced as, you know, on one hand, here's your sassy friend, Juliet, who kind of really didn't seem to have much substance to them. And also, oh, and this is also a non-binary character. Aren't we very progressive for including you, without seeming like they were giving this character much substance? So when we finally got to that song a little while into Act 1, I'm like, okay, they are giving this character substance. I like where their story is going. They have inner depths that I'm looking forward to seeing unfold. So, and just from there, yeah, it kind of, to me, whilst clever stuff continued to happen throughout the show, it stopped kind of being very masturbatory about how clever it was, and started getting invested in the actual story.
Yeah.
And I kind of just felt, as we got on, we had, as they developed Angelique, aka the nurse, into this like fully formed character with her own inner life and subplot, I got very invested in her. And we got more invested in the marital drama between Shakespeare and Anne, that it wasn't just like, aha, we are a framing device commenting on, oh, what if a woman had written the story? Wouldn't it be different then? Think about that, because that's what I basically thought. That was like, yes, we get it. A woman would write the story different. Very clever play. But yeah, like they actually, you know, the part, there was one line, and it wasn't until Act 2 that actually like really hit hard for me, that and kind of recontextualized, I think, a lot of what we had seen earlier. And that was, I don't remember what song it was in the middle of, but it was a private moment between Anne, aka April, because she takes on the persona of April when she's within the diegetic plot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was her and Juliet kind of having a heart to heart, and she talked about how um, when she met Shakespeare, she was 26, he was 18, she was pregnant, they got rushed into this marriage, and she birthed them 2 daughters, they lost a son, and Juliet says, I'm paraphrasing here, but like, how did you ever get over that? Like, that's awful. And she says, I'm not yet sure that we have. And that was like, oh my god, yeah, like I feel for these characters that I thought only existed to be clever framing device.
Yeah.
So yeah, like it good. It won me over, basically, is what I'm saying. So when I say that I was pleasantly surprised, it's because, yeah, I was really worried that I wasn't going to enjoy this show, and the show did a good job of making me enjoy it.
Absolutely. And I think this is just like, for me, the whole thesis of the play, and this is a lot, the content of the music itself presents itself like you're getting the big power ballads from like a Demi Lovato, from a Katy Perry, from a Britney Spears, from boy bands as well, like from NSYNC, Backstreet Boys, and the list goes on, of like confidence and showing your true colors and being yourself and finding strength, and working through difficult things. And it was really lovely kind of seeing every character have a taste of that, or to have to go through that, or to have to sing that. And even if they weren't on lead vocals for such song, like they were in it and they were discovering themselves through other characters, or they were placing, they knew their place amidst other characters. Like one scene that really came out to me, or showed stuck with me rather, is right after May sings I'm not a girl, not yet a woman, and Juliet is there listening to May. And then so we see our titular protagonist on stage, but she knows in that moment she is a support system, she is the best friend, and creating that space of May speaking from the heart and getting stuff out, and then Juliet saying like, I'm gonna leave you your space, and so I just, that's just like an example of, I think that happens often where characters were giving each other the stage, and I think that's rare in like a lot of shows, a lot of musicals, and I think that's where this musical, I hope it stays around for a long time, because I think it just has a very all-encompassing message for anybody, like we're saying, any age, any gender, any orientation. Like, it's the core thesis of the show, at least what I got from it, was, be your true self, confidence, find that confidence. If you don't have it, it's okay. You'll find it. If you don't have it, people around you will help you get there. Like, and it's, so I just, viewers and listeners know me by now. Like, I love pieces that do that have like a really strong, lovely message of humanity packed within the piece. And then on top of that, you feeling the literal like rumbling of the seats from the awesome like bass and beats of the music, and it's a party and there's glitter and confetti everywhere. It literally puts a cherry on top of the well-made cupcake that this show is. So now I've gone on my little tangent.
You want to talk, like we've kind of come in and out about the music a bit, but sort of specifically, this is, I think, the first Jukebox musical we've reviewed on the Cup.
Yeah, I think it is.
And yeah, it's an interesting genre or subgenre that, like, I don't know if you want to talk again from our different vantage points of having different relationship to this music. I don't know if you have thoughts about the selection or how it was woven into the plot or anything along those lines.
Again, my family loves jukebox musicals, like my parents do. So I grew up with like Mamma Mia, Rock of Ages, We Will Rock You. Like those have been core musicals in like what I've grown up with. And to me, and this is, a lot of people don't, a lot of people, especially musical theater people too, don't like jukebox musicals. I love them. I think they're just like, they add like a layer of corny or a layer of cheese to like a plot. And the thing I really like though about And Juliet is uh the the sort of book scenes. So book scene is like in a musical, it's just like the dialogue minus music. So like dialogue between characters, those are called book scenes. So the book scenes sort of bled their way into a song. So that was kind of like an extra, like, and it wasn't cheesy. To me, it was like brilliant. I was like, oh my God, of course they're going into this song. But you know, you see like We Will Rock You, Rock of Ages, like it's a bit more of like a cheekier entryway into songs, and cheesier entryway. But there's something to like, to me, I find jukebox musicals, they welcome in like a different type of audience too. Like a lot of folks who aren't theater goers or are not familiar with musicals, like they latch to jukebox musicals because they understand, they're familiar with the music prior to seeing the show. So for example, like my dad, for instance, like he's a doctor, but he loves music, like, and is very well versed in many genres. But you know, I know when he would go to see like a Mamma Mia or go to see a We Will Rock You, he's like, you see like a smile on his face because he's like, oh, I know, gimme, like I've heard this one, you know what I mean? And so like you could feel that in the audience today too, of when like, especially when the Du Bois bands come out and they literally did, yeah, they did like some of the OG choreography from they did Everybody. Yeah, from the Everybody song of Backstreet Boys, Everybody. Everybody in, like, literally everybody in the audience was blushing because they're like, oh my gosh, we know this song, we know this vibe, we know this choreography. A lot of them probably did it like me and my sister on their front lawn with listening to Backstreet Boys on their boombox. So there's just like a familiarity. And so I love that about jukebox musicals. Like it's just like another layer of, yeah, of, I guess that's the way of putting it, of familiarity and comfort. And then I think something like this piece where, you know, again, going back to like We Will Rock You or Mamma Mia, like, yes, there are storylines, there's a plot, there are conflict, but to me, it's a bit more, usually jukebox musicals have a bit more of a surface-y layer to their plot. But with And Juliet, like this, to me, there was heavier themes being dealt with and being sussed out and being called out. So that was like really neat for me to see that sort of genre of musical theater, both of those genres, I guess, like coming together. I don't know if I'm making sense. I'm still building off of the energy. So pivoting it to you.
No, you're making a lot of sense. And like, I have a lot of thoughts about this element. So I'll just start with, you said like, oh, it was very fun and cheeky how the book scenes bled into the music scenes. And I would love to know, and if anyone like involved in the writing of this piece is watching, like get down in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. But I would love to know, did they write basically a completely non-musical version of this play? Because you could. The book scenes are substantial enough that could have just been a play. Like, did they write that and then be like, okay, what song from this era feels appropriate to go here, and then write the line that kind of bleeds into that? Or they're like, okay, these are the songs we're working with. Like, we got this catalog from Warner Brothers or whoever owns the rights to all this music. Yeah. And like, okay, these are the songs we're allowed to use from this list, and we will thread together a plot that gets us from point A to point B to this song to that song. And I think in the case of most jukebox musicals, it is the latter. I don't know if it is in this case but when we think about jukebox musicals, and there's also different types of it, because like something like, think for example, like Jersey Boys or A Leader of the Pack, that is, this is basically a theatrical biopic of a particular band or musical artist using their songs as the basis of this musical. And of course, we're going to use their songs because it's about them. And then you have things like Mamma Mia or Girl from North Country, which is, okay, we have a catalog of a specific artist. The purpose of the show is to highlight ABBA or Bob Dylan, and we will come up with a plot unrelated to those particular musical artists, but just a plot that allows us to bring up the highly relevant lyrics of these songs. So take the songs and like, okay, what kind of plot can we reverse engineer out of these lyrics? And then we have something like Rock of Ages, and prior to Aunt Juliet, I'd kind of struggle to think of, although I'm sure one exists, something similar to that, where it's just like, this isn't a specific artist, but it's a period of music that we're covering. In Rock of Ages, it's the 80s. And here it's kind of like 2.5 full decades of pop music. And it's interesting because, like, not being limited to a specific artist the way like Mamma Mia is, you're kind of, you have a very large canvas to work within. It's not just like, okay, yep, these are the ABBA songs that everybody knows and remembers. Let's, we have to do Dancing Queen, we have to do Fernando, etc. Slip through my fingers in there because we need one sad sounding song in this ABBA musical. But like, but yeah, like we have a lot of choice in this whole 2.5 decades that's being covered here. So, and it occurred to me again, this might be coming from me being like, again, not being the most familiar with this music. I've heard most of it and know a lot of it, but like it's not really foundational to my identity, as I mentioned. I think it's interesting that this quite recent music, in order to be integrated into a jukebox musical, I guess we've reached the point where people are nostalgic for it. Like, I think that is a foundational requirement for writing a jukebox musical. You're not going to write one out of the current top 40 hits, but it sort of has to gestate and sort of have a place in our shared culture in order to kind of spit it out on the other end of, and now here's a story we can tell with it. And if I think about this particular period in music history that's being covered here, like it's interesting because like I'm trying to think of like, what is the story that maybe a music historian, if you're watching this, get down in the comments, will tell a very different story than what I'm thinking here. But like we tend to kind of, for convenience sake, we break music into decades of sort of like, what were the big ideas? We had like a lot of like, revolutionary themes in the 60s and like, etc. And then when I think about the 90s, which is the kind of early end of the period that we're covering here, the 90s, well, this is some of the big music from the 90s, but I think of other types of music that came out of the 90s that I think have more of a story attached to them, as in, in the 90s we had grunge, which kind of was this sort of, end of history kind of defeat, coming to terms with like, what is it like to be a young person now, aimless and not knowing what your life even means. Yeah. And we had, a lot of early hip hop in this period as these two like large defining forces of the character of the music. And hip hop, of course, like very revolutionary, anti-authoritarian, coming, from the margins of society. Like now it's taken over, but it was quite new and prominent at the time. And then I look at the stuff that we have in this musical, which is also from the same period. But like, I think the story that for people who aren't like very like emotionally invested in this music, the story that's often told about it is, this is like, the term bubblegum comes up, but like it's commercial, it's assembly line, if you will. These boy bands aren't necessarily friends who started a band together as much as they are like assembled by producers, which is interesting, I think, to me, that we've reached the point where, instead of kind of having that cynical description that I just assigned to it, that there is like genuine emotions attached to this, that we can build this sort of, power anthem story around, that it can be empowering. And maybe it always was, and I was just never like in the right demographic to experience that. But yeah, I think it's an interesting sector of this particular time to kind of build this story around. And sorry, you want to say something?
Just now that I'm skimming the list, we may be like, as far just from what I'm at a glance, Backstreet Boys, NSYNC, Britney Spears, like they had a life in the 90s, but we would have to dramaturgically due diligence ourselves, because this might just be early aughts into the 2010s. Because I'm looking at, there's definitely more, we're definitely more so in the new millennium, because we have like Kelly Clarkson, we have Katy Perry, we have like Demi Lovato, we have Pink, and those songs I definitely know we've gotten ourselves out of the 90s. So we may have to look into that, because
sure, and like whether or not, like for convenience sake, like we just kind of draw the lines in these decades. I would say everything I've just said, aside from there were other interesting things happening in music at the time, like
Yeah.
specifically grunge and hip hop, and although grunge kind of had its moment and maybe, or developed in interesting directions, hip hop obviously never went anywhere. In fact, got even more successful after the
Right.
90s.
Yeah.
But yeah, like whether or not it's 90s or 2000s, I just
Yeah.
think this moment of music history that is captured here is an interesting one for the kinds of stories that we do tell about it, and how we're maybe revisiting or revisioning those stories through pieces like this, and what
Yeah.
this music can mean to us.
Well,
But yeah, if it is, yeah, go ahead.
Well, just a lot of these songs too. Like personally, I know I've like a lot of these songs for me are like power anthem ballads that like preteen, teenage Jill would like rely on Kelly Clarkson heavily to get myself out of whatever, crush or puberty thing I was dealing with. And I think we see like again, skimming the list, like a lot of these songs mean a lot and or meant a lot to folks that are like in their 20s and 30s. And I mean even now too, because a lot of these songs and artists are either still practicing and or icons that like my kids will know NSYNC, Backstreet Boys, Spice Girls, Britney Spears, just because if we were talking like decades too, like think of the icons that we grew up that our parents liked, right? It's the same kind of thing. And so that's the one thing I did like about, I would love to pick the brain of Max Martin and friends of, what made you come to this melange of songs, right? Because like they're all power ballads, or they're all like icons, but the way that they're parsed out in the show or mapped out in the show, to me, it's kind of like a mixed bag. Like we're not like, this is a Britney chunk of the show, this is an Ariana Grande chunk of the show. It's kind of like sprinkled in whatever the plot requires. If this is a moment of strength, we're going to sing Stronger by Britney Spears. Or like if this is the boy band time in the next scene, we're going to do NSYNC, And so like, yeah, I would love to be like on the other end of that table of like, why these songs, Since You've Been Gone is the only Kelly Clarkson we have. Why that song? We get why in the plot, like the device it's playing in the plot makes so much sense. But again, these are like rhetorical questions. Like I think it's beautifully sewn together, but they really are like different. I've used this image before, but like different squares of like a quilt, right? Different textures and different patterns that make like this colorful quilt. That is. Can we please talk about the costumes and the set?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. So if, by my ensemble, I'm inspired clearly heavily. I was obsessed with the costumes in the set. Let's start costumes first. It was such a beautiful blend of like OG Elizabethan-esque. We got some corsets in there, puffy sleeves in there, breeches. And then like the color pop was stunning. And me, I'm very sensitive to color too. And it was always complimented on stage. Like that to me, I think is costume designer genius. I'm going to look up who our costume designer is because I'm going to shout them out. Paloma Young, like brilliant, because I was always that to me, like seeing, a character leaves and then another character comes on. There was a harmony and a complement of color always. And I think it really helped a lot of our ensemble members. Shout out to phenomenal ensemble performance and demeanor wise, like such a foundation of a piece for the piece rather. But they were always like very colorful. So I think that helped to lift. But even like the costume changes of some of our protagonists, like there was sparkle, or there was like pastels, or there was like a deep magenta. And anyways, to me, it really, our setting predominantly was Paris too. So again, you think like, to me, when I think of like Parisian-esque things, I think of like macaroons, like little pastel-y macaroons. I think of fashion, right? So I think of like these big swaths of colors and design. And I just thought that the marrying of the atmosphere that our characters were literally walking in, like the streets of Paris, was replicated on their person, on their and then even talking about like when there's like a big diva moment, like our Juliet would be bedecked in sparkles and bedazzles. Yeah, I could go on and on and on, but every single detail was breathtaking from the costume department. So I guess before I unpack set, like, do you have anything to add or want to talk about?
Nothing to add that you haven't already said. It was all very lovely, well done costumes, and you noticed a lot more about it than I did. So I'm happy.
Well, and it was nice because it was almost like everyone was Elizabethan bounding, right? It was like Francois had on like a puffy sleeve shirt, but then he had on like Adidas track pants. Or, you know, like there's even times when Juliet, or you would see not only Juliet, but other characters like remove the puffy sleeves. There was that image where Juliet was like about to go sing a song and she actually took off the puffed part of her sleeves and threw it into the moving malleable hole in the stage. And I was like, oh, that's a cool image too. And yeah, wow. Sorry, I'm just exploding with costumes. Like, so good. And then there was like the subtle moments too of when Juliet was prepping for her wedding. Like she was all in like a muted pink or white, and April also was donned in that too. So it just it's been a very long time seeing a show, like for me, where seeing costumes in a show were played just as much of a pivotal part as any other character on that stage. Like personally, I think it definitely added a storytelling element. It added an ambiance element. Yeah. And that's me lovingly ranting about costumes.
What about set?
Set. Okay, so lots of things were going on. And again, like the plot itself, multi-layered things were happening. So because every show is like a pop ballad, concert ballad, not every show, sorry, every song pretty well is like some sort of pop ballad or pop diva reverberating piece. There were like monitors built in that would like fly in and out of the stage space. There was like a digitized screen at the back, which would have either, you know, statements of where we are at or like concert sort of like popping pizzazz moments. And then the set itself, like I said, there was a patch of the stage that folks would either come in or go out in. There was a revolving stage. It was like a multi-purpose revolving too. Like two circles would sometimes go together or against each other. That was at center stage. There was a fly in, fly out. There's a beautiful moment where Juliet and Romeo are on like a Ferris wheel, but basically they're sitting on like a love seat and they go up in the air. There's one of the revolving circles sort of lifts from the stage and that becomes like a stage for like the heavier pop emotion moments. And then at that near the end, Juliet comes up again from the hole in the stage on like this sort of like platform that I have seen Taylor Swift, Nicki Minaj, Katy Perry also emerge from. So just again, the mechanics of the stage, breathtaking, brilliant. And like I said, with the costumes, to me, I think was another character of the piece. And to me, both of these like accessory, usually, you know, when we talk about, and especially on the Cup reviews too, when we talk about costume or the production elements, right? They're usually the accessories that kind of like, okay, we have the plot, we have our characters, we have our actors, this is the story, and what's lifting them, right? And then quite literally this performance, I find like, no, like the costuming and the stage they are the piece. Like the piece would not be as bodacious if it weren't for these elements. And so, yeah, just like beautifully blown away. And you're already hooked into the story and want to follow along, but these added elements just keep you fueled, keep that energy sort of bubbling in your seat, in my opinion. I guess I'm like costume and set number one fan.
Yeah, like I again don't have much to add. I would say for the set, my favorite set piece, which I don't think you mentioned, was the big sign that says at the beginning of the play, it's just the and Juliet.
Yeah.
And we see kind of the way the stage is set at the beginning that the letters for Romeo are all over the place, that there's the empty grate where Romeo would have been hung, and they start like picking up the letters and hanging them but don't finish like at the beginning. But yeah, I kind of just love this opening image of Romeo has literally been exploded all over the stage, and it's just and Juliet, and then they made really good use of that, like when it is revealed, or when Shakespeare decides that in fact Romeo is alive now, his was a sleeping potion too, and he comes back, then it's restored, and it is Romeo and Juliet, and then at the very end when they give it another try. Spoilers again, we're in the spoiler zone, and instead of ending with either a marriage or double suicide, they decide why don't we just end with the first date and see how this relationship goes? Why do we need the definitive strictures of a Freytag pyramid, and just to decide what types of dynamics of closure the story can have? But like, these are the pleasant surprises that I love. That we, as she says, it's Juliet and Romeo, and he says, why is your name first? And she says, was it like I Want It That Way, or was that the joke on the 90s song? And then the sign kind of reversed, like right before our eyes on a track, and then put her name first. So like that was just a very great set piece that they used very well in like a lot of different scenes and contexts. But otherwise, yes, I concur with everything you said about the set and costumes.
Yeah. So I'm going to pivot us a little bit. This kind of popped in my brain, and it may take a lot of unpacking, but or maybe not. I'm going to say it out, and you take it as you will. So Romeo and Juliet being like the OG lover plot, basically in theater, or as in Western theater, at least. So yeah, it's the whole piece revolves around this couple, and so this piece. We had four like adamant couples that sort of the show resolves, and we're left with four couplings. So we have like Romeo and Juliet. We have Angelique, who is our nurse, and Lance. We have Francois and May, and then we have Anne Hathaway and William Shakespeare himself. So Brian, I guess choose your own adventure, or talk a little bit about each. What did you think of? I guess you can talk either about like the arcs of these couples and or the resolve that occurred with these couples.
Yeah. Okay. So there's a lot of dimensions.
There's a lot. I know.
Those four couples. What I really love is that all of them came to some kind of interesting closure that is not necessarily the version of that closure that you would expect at the beginning or when the plots were first introduced. Because right off the bat, like I mentioned, like where I kind of finally started leaning in after my sort of not most pleasant opening of the show was when, okay, we're developing May as this character, like not just like a fun sidekick, but as someone with depths and plot and subplot of their own. So I guess to start in that coupling between Francois and May, I think, that was very important that we got to have the subplot. And what I really like is that we are introduced to Francois as this character that, like, okay, is this the guy that Juliet's gonna wind up with now that she's... And for a while there in the plot, you think that's where it's going, but they kind of do subtle things to kind of hint that, oh, this relationship is not what it seems. Like, they kind of, it's very Cinderella, Prince Topher sort of esque, that, like, oh, he's not interested in any of the ladies that show up to this ball that his father keeps throwing for him to introduce him. And, in old-timey fairy tales like Cinderella, it never really occurs to the authors that, hey, maybe he's gay, and that's why he's not interested in any of the ladies that show up at the ball. And, like, what's very interesting here is that, maybe he's gay, maybe he's not, maybe it's complicated, but the fact that he falls in love with and winds up with May, an explicitly non-binary character, like shows that there's these things are more complicated than just eligible bachelor, pretty lady. You two should start breeding already, as so many of these stories often do. So and the fact that both of those characters got these kinds of interesting depths from that side plot, I thought that was like very just well done, well handled. There was one moment close to the top of Act 2 where I thought like it was, to me, it seemed like it was creating unnecessary extra drama. I forget what song it was, but it was a scene where May and Francois were arguing about like how they're gonna proceed with the situation. And like me in the audience, I'm just like, just tell Juliet she's friends with both of you. She'd understand. And I felt like they were contriving a little too much drama on that side of the
But
love triangle.
the good thing about that though was, to me, at the end when Juliet was like, I wish you guys would have just told me, but I understand that your situation is complicated and difficult. Like, and I think that's, again, it's a subtle message that this piece does really well of like that. Yeah, those are big, big sort of coming to moments that, you know, aren't the easiest to come out to your best friend or.
I also felt like maybe part of what I was taking issue with in that moment was less that, oh, why didn't they just tell her? Because I get also that there was a big conflict, is also my dad wants me to marry or he's going to send me to war. And what I really liked is, sorry, I'm jumping ahead and then I'll backtrack a second, but the scene, what was the song? It was Shape of My Heart was the song where they tell Lance, Francois's father, about their relationship, and he understands completely, and he too has had a love that he wanted to pursue and didn't, so it all makes sense. You know, he doesn't care about any of the gender or queer.
Well, and I love, like, physically you see him accept both of them.
Yes, that's a very important part of this. And I like it. It kind of reminds me of, you know, slight spoilers for the final season of Schitt's Creek, but it reminds me of a very like touching scene in that show where we meet Patrick's parents, and they find out that Patrick and David are in a relationship, and you think, oh, they're not handling it well. And, you know, the father says, like, did I do something wrong as a father? And it turns out that he's not upset that his son is gay. He's upset that his son didn't feel like he could tell him that he was gay. And what did I do wrong that you didn't feel like that was okay? So it really kind of called to mind that moment. And I thought that was very touching and well done. So that whole subplot came to this very nice resolution. So since we brought up Lance, that's the one I would like to lance in.
Okay, great. Yes.
My two favorite characters in the whole show, I will say, Angelique in particular, is just lovely. And I think what is really interesting and part of the whole reclamative discourse of this play is that it gives the maid a romantic, or the nurse, like this kind of like funny side elderly character from Romeo and Juliet. It not only brings her along for the journey, but like gives her a romantic subplot and shows that she has a past. And she's like the funniest character in the whole thing. I want to shout out the actor who played her in particular. Her name, Melanie Labarrie. Very, very just like such a wonderful performance, dynamic character. Really, really well done. And I loved the dynamic that these characters had and how it kind of foils the other characters' relationships, but also kind of is its own thing. And like we get to spend time with them in this like interesting way. Sorry, I know I just plowed ahead to a different couple. Did you have anything you wanted to say about Francois?
No, I also think like the genre, like the musical genre, sat beautifully in both of these characters too, because these are our oldest characters on stage, and like these actors grew up with their kids listening to this music, but you know, so they've probably listened to it as much as the other people on the stage, but through a different lens, right? So it was like really fun to like hear them sing this type of music, and I think, and then also sort of like gyrate and gesticulate and let the music kind of vibe them that way, because I think like that's this type of music, like you can't not, and I think that helped to sort of like enliven their relationship again, and you know, give them the permission, even though they don't need it, but give them the personal permission to like fuel that youthful fire again, you know, within themselves as individuals and also in relationship too. And just to kind of see the music sort of loosen their characters up in that way was like really lovely to see.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
No, and I just like that we had an older couple that gets to be like feisty and romantic with each other, and and that theirs isn't like an easy road either. That like they had an affair. You know, while he was married and she was working as their maid. And that I loved her whole monologue about like this was too much drama, so I left to go to Verona, and then I wound up with the most dramatic family in the world. They're always fighting with his other family and killing each other, and then killing each other and killing themselves. And then I came back, and who do I run into? You again. Like chef's kiss, brilliant, like all of that.
Me too was like a lovely sort of fourth wall like helper character too. She was like the character that kind of like bluntly or blatantly, you know, meant or is exasperated about a moment that like people in the audience can relate to, or like,
And
you
that's
know,
who she is in the original Shakespeare version
yeah,
too, but like
yeah,
really kind of like leaning into that and dialing it up to 11, but not reducing her to that,
yeah,
which is what
exactly.
I think this production or well, this show just really does well.
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely.
do you want to move on to another couple? Or
Yeah.
okay, I'll save the titular one for last because I have special thoughts about them. But
Ooh,
let's
titular, do you mean titular Shakespeare and Anne or titular Juliet and
no
Romeo?
titular. The play is titled and Juliet.
Yeah,
That's what I
yeah,
mean when I say titular. So we'll talk about Shakespeare and Anne for a moment
okay,
first,
yeah,
so we can kind of get into some of my more complex thoughts in a bit. But I really liked the dynamic between Shakespeare and Anne because again, this goes back to like why I was happy that it wasn't going in some of the directions that I felt like I was predicting at the beginning. Is that it wasn't just like, oh, male husband who represents the patriarchal Western canon. You wrote a play with poorly developed female characters. I'm a female. I will fix it. Because
yeah,
that's kind of, it could have been that, and that would have been fine and enough, and most people probably would have liked it. I wouldn't have been the biggest fan of just leaving
yeah,
it at that. But I like how, as it unfolded, not only did these characters get more invested in the story and actually like intervene into it, but that we realize that the whole thing and the whole kind of need to wrest power from each other over this story was them working through their marital problems and not just like, oh,
yeah,
we are bickering, but like actually the like I mentioned the line earlier about like them never really getting over losing a son, like that's
yeah,
huge. Like this, like there is literal trauma and history in this relationship that like is
mhm,
easy to brush over, but I think it fuels a lot of what we're seeing on stage and how
yeah,
the end of the show isn't huzzah, Juliet does what Juliet does, but it is actually okay. You two have been fighting over what this play should be the whole time. Let's sit you down and talk about it, and you really need to work out what this is. And like, and Shakespeare is the one who realized, like, yeah, I've been too invested in my work. She thought this play must be about our relationship because of the interesting parallels between our own.
mhm,
Um, I have thoughts, I guess, in general. We don't need to get into too much here about this whole sort of idea of assuming that Shakespeare's plays must have been autobiographical in some degree,
right,
just because I feel like we don't know enough about Shakespeare's inner life to make any claims of that kind. Like, it's fun to speculate. It's also interesting the way Shakespeare as a character is framed, especially at the beginning of this, as like big celebrity playwright when like you look at something like Shakespeare in Love, which, for all of its problems, historical or otherwise, that movie has something that I think Stoppard, like in his screenplay for it, really got right, is just how unglamorous it would have been to have been a playwright in that time.
right,
Like he wasn't a big celebrity that everyone was loving and fawning over. That to have been a playwright is like, you are treated like dirt. You're not special. And even a successful one like Shakespeare, like
mhm,
so yeah, I think there's some interesting, playing with that history, but I get that there's sort of different parallels that they're trying to evoke
mhm,
here. And, we got all the classic jokes in about, oh, yes, my name is Anne Hathaway, like, the
yeah,
actor,
yeah,
we got a second best bed joke in there because, of course, we did.
yeah.
Yeah, sorry, do you want to
One thing
jump
that
in?
and maybe I'm missing something again. There was quite a few off, I will admit, where I was just like bopping in my seat and loving the music and living my best life. But one thing that didn't make sense to me, and because you're right, like there was a complexity to their relationship and the way that they both manipulated the piece. It wasn't like, okay, great, Anne has the quill and Anne is rewriting. It was very much like they were both throwing themselves in. Literally, William Shakespeare played the carriage man and Anne playing April. But if you recall, and again, maybe I'm missing something, but Will is the one who is responsible for nudging Francois and May together.
Yes.
And what I didn't like at the end, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, but we didn't really get a, a sort of a tied understanding from Anne, and I almost kind of wanted Anne to acknowledge Will Like, do you see how now that Juliet has her own voice and can make her own choices? Yes, that's awesome. But what I did see you do throughout this whole process, also, husband, is you were thinking outside of the box and pairing these characters who aren't in the OG R&J. So already you're dealing with characters that weren't in your original. And you also place them in a relationship that is not normative. There wasn't that acknowledging of that, you know? And I loved seeing that. I remember like it was like, oh, that's Shakespeare making May one of the Du Bois, right? They needed a fifth boy band. They needed a fifth boy for the boy band. So they called upon May. And William said, like, I think I know someone who, and there's actually the mechanism of like, we need to make these two lovers meet. And the lovers he's referring to are Francois and May. And we actually have Anne come back on stage like, what did I miss? I was just changing my dress. And it was like, well, you just missed something revolutionary. Like, you know? And I didn't like from like I would have loved that. I get that there was like their own relationship. There was trauma to unpack and sort of like, but there, the moment where Romeo did the like, I'm sorry, to me that didn't sit very well with me, because it's like, okay, yes, apologize for not, giving Anne the time of day, not hearing her out. But like, you were shaking stuff up, no pun intended, you were shaking stuff up in this sort of rewrite or reconsidering of the piece too. So I would have liked there to be more of like an acknowledgement from Anne.
Yeah. So my kind of big thought on this is I had mixed feelings about this, because on one hand, part of why I was maybe a little disappointed for like a first big chunk of the play is that I agreed with Shakespeare for a lot of things, as in there was no conflict for the first like 15 minutes of the show. And, Anne was trying to write the version where, everything goes smooth and they get to, have fun and party, something that was deprived of them in the original version. Mm-hmm. She literally, as April, was walking around with the quill, and anytime they encountered some kind of obstacle, like the bouncer not letting them into the soiree,
she just, an adventure. Like, yeah.
Yeah, she just wrote in the version, and like I kind of agreed with Shakespeare, who I felt like we were supposed to disagree with in that moment, that like, this is boring as hell, where's the tension, where's the conflict, like, and that was, contributing to my displeasure in the early scenes. And especially because I felt like Anne was, whether she was or not, being framed as righteous or for doing so. Like, she was in the moral right, correct for, like, isn't it good that we're giving Juliet a fun time? Like, yeah, but like, why is this a play? Why are we watching it? Like, write this in a journal. Don't write it, or like, don't put it on a stage. So when...
Although, no, I'm going to stop you right there, though, because I think there was some, like, joie de vivre that, like, Juliet and every other female character in Shakespeare doesn't have permission to have. So, like, it's allowed to have the blow soiree.
No, I'm saying the soiree was fine and it was fun, but, like, it just, for a long swath of the beginning of the play, I'm like, okay, when is something gonna happen? Like, plot-wise. And
I think it would have been okay if something didn't happen, though. Like,
okay.
And... yeah, I honestly, I'll argue, I think that's our way of like needing structure or needing something to sort of...
needing something interesting to happen. I don't know, maybe me being a lot less enamored with just like the music for the music's sake, I guess. Like, I wanted more of like a story, and to me, I felt like we weren't getting one until, like a little while in.
But yeah. I don't think it's like journalable or diaryable, as you were saying. Like, I think there needed to be some agency given to...
Well, yeah. But it's depriving it agency by, oh no, conflict, how are you going to get out of it? Oh, I will just write it with my quill and now we don't have to deal with it. Like,
I think that showed an indication of like, we will upset this form if we need to. And then once we get sort of the plot starting clicking again, that's sort of like a frame that we are now aware can happen, will happen. But then right when we're on board with that happening, the quill breaks. Mm-hmm. So I think it definitely was necessary, but I mean, okay. To each their own opinion. But yeah, I stand by them having the moments up until the sort of built-in tension.
Well, yeah, I stand by it because it was ultimately subverted. But like, I would have been very bored if the whole play was just that, I guess, is all I'm saying.
Yeah.
But then it does get subverted, and the first subversion that we get to it is, this is to the scene you were talking about. It's Shakespeare getting the quill back for himself and writing this like meet cute scene where Francois and May get together, or at least start blossoming a relationship. And this is right after Juliet and Francois had just gotten engaged, which was kind of like a bit of a beard type situation, whether they realized it or not at the time, that she didn't want to go to the nunnery, he didn't want to go to the army, so this was just mutually beneficial for both of them.
Mm-hmm.
But Shakespeare comes along and be like, aha, I'm going to turn this into a much ado about nothing, and I'm going to write in conflict by having a third contender and turn it into a love triangle, and oh no, drama will ensue. And it did, and it got very interesting at that point. And then immediately after, he's like, and what if Romeo is still alive? And isn't that going to complicate this even further? Now, when you think about that, if it had gone Shakespeare's way, that actually wouldn't have complicated it any further, because Juliet and Francois didn't really love each other. May and Francois seem to. And if she does indeed still love Romeo, although she learned all kinds of stuff that made her question her like short escapade with him, that would resolve it. We get these two couples can couple off in their own direction. She's already married to him, so that just works. And these two can be together, and they're admittedly non-normative, but all of Shakespeare is queer from the very start because men play these roles, and they have to make a joke about that in the play because of course they do. So yeah, I'm trying to remember what you said that got us on this tangent to begin with, but we were talking about these relationships and couplings.
Oh, just how like Anne acknowledging that Shakespeare purposely was pairing May and Francois together.
Right. So I think she didn't the character doesn't recognize that, oh, you did a good thing by nudging these two together, because it was deliberately done, not because I think they're cute together and I'm gonna play matchmaker. As the author, I'm the only one who can, and it was more like I'm going to upset the balance of the lovely conflict-free story that Anne is trying to tell, and I think she wasn't happy with that. But yeah, there could have been like a nice line at the end where she's like, but those two belong together, so good on you for
Yeah, like I wanted some of that equal, like, to me that would have put the bow around like feminism of this piece, I think, and acknowledging, because a lot of the themes and a lot of the songs, like we've talking about, it's acknowledging you as the person, it's acknowledging your strength, it's acknowledging your weakness, it's acknowledging where you're at, wherever you're at. So as something that is like rest in literally every piece of song is reiterating and pumping that message, I felt a little like undone at the end, because I was like, I feel like there wasn't enough of everyone noticing each other and lifting each other in a piece that I just watched the whole company lift each other, and the message lifting each other in micro moments and as a macro, like literally the stage moving and they're all it's like, but I mean, I guess that's okay. Like, it's, we don't have to like sit around and hold hands and pat each other on the back, but I think that is a missed opportunity of like honoring someone who in society's eyes would be, scapegoated for not seeing outside of a heteronormative cisgendered box, to be like, hey, you may not even have seen what you did, but by you, creating this tension or this plot device, you actually brought together two people who were destined together and very much in love, and, who don't usually get an accepted love story given to them. So good job. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
I think that's fair. I'd say in the absence of that, we got the scene that I mentioned earlier of Lance accepting his son's relationship.
Right.
It's not from the author, like, good job for being a progressive author in early modern English, but we at least got like this is a relationship that doesn't usually get honored, and we will honor it from a
and I guess
patriarchal authority.
Yeah, and I guess that's another that you're unpacking that. I guess that's another like lovely literal take on the story was really left in the characters' mouths and bodies, and have the characters tell their own stories. Right, because on the other end, like, you wouldn't want to be like, oh, it's because of William Shakespeare that the relationship between Francois and May have become a thing. Like, no, it's like
two characters that
all of them go on their own journeys and created that for themselves. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that, we solved it. Good
There we
job
go.
there.
We unpacked.
Last couple is
Yeah.
the titular couple, or at least half of the title.
Yeah.
I have thoughts about this one. I don't know. Do you want to go first before I muddy it up with my thoughts, or should I just have it?
Well, I have like a very specific about one of the characters, so I don't know if that would be like a garnish on what you're about to say, or if I should just open it up.
Why don't you open it up?
And maybe it's just I need to sit with it more, but I don't understand Romeo, like the character of Romeo in this iteration. I really don't. And maybe it's because quite literally he has no control over him being alive again. Like, I think of all the characters we see, sort of like characters of the OG Romeo and Juliet, like, it's kind of like halfway through the show, Will is like, okay, we're going to resurrect Romeo. So like, he's kind of coming in late to the party. He was dead for a really long time, quote unquote, for those just listening. And then all of a sudden, oh no, it was just sleeping potion. So he's awake again. So maybe that is him discombobulated. So that's kind of like where we're getting him anyways. Like, he's just as confused as maybe we are of this sort of like plot addition. But just the way that Romeo was carried out was very clownish. And in the scene where he confesses, like it's the Ferris wheel scene, and he's confessing his love to Juliet. At that point, I was like, you don't even love her anymore. Like, there was a moment where I was like, oh my God, yes, the two of you are going to be like, listen, we were thrown into this story. We were, we got caught up with each other. In 4 days, we made like a freak decision to marry each other. But now that we're outside of the plot, let's be friends and like allow ourselves to create our own adventure, or like find ourselves a little more. And in the moment when Romeo was like, but I'm still in love with you and I really want you, I was like, I didn't feel that he did. And then also Juliet having a moment of, oh my God, maybe I really love you too. I guess it just wasn't strong enough. So when at the end, when they reunite and it's Juliet saying, no, I don't, let's just consider this a first date. I kind of hope they don't end up, because I think they're better being each other's like support systems to figure each other out. Because I also think there's room for both of them to be queer themselves. I think there's just like a lot of identity that they didn't figure out, and that they have every right to figure out. And maybe that means they come back to each other and they do genuinely love each other. And so I guess what I kind of like about the sort of get out of jail free of like, what is this relationship again, is when Juliet's saying like, this is just a first date. But if there was an and Juliet too, I kind of hope it's just like they're friends. Like, I don't know. And maybe this is just my take on it. But I also, because I think there is even that lovely intimate moment where the two of them are sitting beneath the stars. And I don't mean intimate as in like, ooh, lovers. No, they're like raw teenagers sitting, even though they're in their 20s is the specific rewrite that Anne puts in. But anyone who's in their 20s, basically you're a teenager with more responsibility, but or trying to wade your way through. But anyways, they're sitting like rawly at the, the base of the stage, and they're just hashing out a convo of like, this is how I feel. I don't know why I'm feeling, or I'm getting emotional. I don't know why. And I was like, oh, this is kind of nice. They're kind of like, let's dial back for a second and like genuinely talk about our feelings instead of, the honeymoon, I want to sex you up phase is kind of done. So let's like just hash stuff out. And so I kind of would have loved if the piece ended with them just as like really good support systems of like, maybe we end up, maybe we don't, but for now, like, we are in each other's corner to see where that goes. So something didn't really sit the best with me when they kind of like did still end up, even though it is still considered a first date.
Not end up, but the play ends with them giving each other another chance.
Right.
And like, if I could cut in here, because yeah, I had a lot of similar thoughts, and I think for me it boils down to just a creative decision or a creative inconsistency. We might not even be able to call it a decision, where the writers of this piece, like the actual writers, not Will and Anne,
Yeah.
couldn't. To me, I feel like they couldn't decide, is Romeo just an empty-headed douche that we're not supposed to like? Which they
Right.
literally call him a douche in the plot, and he agrees with that assessment of him. So is he just an empty-headed douche, or is he someone, who has, depths and emotions and deserves love too, but has made some mistakes and needs to
Yeah.
kind of like grow as a person? And it seemed like from one scene to the other he was one, and then he was the other, and like there was not like a consistent through line.
Yeah.
Because if he is just the douche that they very frequently portrayed him as, who lied to Juliet and had so many other relationships with basically everyone in Verona and didn't
Mhm.
tell her about it, and kind of casts a bad light on, well, why is Juliet special to him? Because she's the one who happened to agree to marry him, I guess.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, it kind of, it makes, if that's the way he's being characterized as he was for most of the show, it makes you think, should she give him another chance? Should they
Right.
date and see where it goes? But then there are the other scenes that kind of do reveal like depths to him, but because it felt very whiplashy going back and forth between them, yeah, I'm with you on that. That I don't really feel like I would take another
Well,
pass at his characterization, I guess, in the writing.
well, and I think what's interesting, and again, this is kind of like um a device that like I feel like the conversation we're having, other folks might feel the same way. And what's neat is, to me, there was a number baked into the musical of like, oh, this is them supporting, like, if this discussion is had, look, our characters are even confused themselves. Because quite literally, there's only a handful of instances where is a mashup. So a song is like two artists layering on top of each other. And that the resolve of the moment we just talked about of Romeo and Juliet on the Ferris wheel, and Romeo being like, I do still love you, want to be with you, and Juliet having like a moment of like, I can't love you. And then she goes into Problem, Ariana Grande's Problem, but that's spiraled into and on top of Romeo goes into Can't Feel My Face by The Weeknd. And both of those songs to me were like, this is a very interesting like choice of song. This was like the first time in the musical where I was like, I don't really understand why these are the songs that are chosen for this moment. But now that we're kind of talking about that moment through this lens, it kind of makes sense, because it's like they're working through something, but I don't even know if them as characters know exactly spot on the nose what that something is. Like, the crux of Juliet things in that moment is like, there's one less problem without you. Like, she knows that there is one more element, like, without being tethered to him, she's able to be more of herself. And to me, like, that was like the tiny thesis of that moment of like musical expression. And then Romeo, like, I can't feel my face when I'm with you, is like, he knows that there is a spark in him that only Juliet can ignite, but he doesn't know what, and he doesn't know how. And so, like, yeah, I was like, oh, I don't know these songs. But now that we're kind of talking about it, I'm like, oh, I don't even think the characters necessarily know why these songs.
Right.
You know?
I think something else, this may be a bit of a side point, but something that also is coming to my mind as we're having this discussion is maybe part of what we're detecting as being wrong, feeling wrong or inconsistent about Romeo in particular, is that when he is birthed back onto the stage at the end of Act 1, we have not seen him yet. We've seen him very briefly just in like the opening song, but like he had no lines. We haven't seen him as a character, but we're all familiar with the play that this is based
Yeah.
on. And when he finally does emerge and he has lines and sings songs, he's not the character that we recognize from Shakespeare's version.
Yeah.
And I think like Juliet also isn't in her own way, but is more so like an
Right.
extension of the character we're familiar with. Whereas like Romeo's first line is "I'm back." That's dope. Like, who are you? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
you're not back. You're a completely new character, and that's fine, maybe. But like it.
Yeah.
But
Well, and also we're left with the like the again, the set played heavily and the music played heavily on like pre-show and interwoven intermission and post-show. There was a lot of like clues and hints, and Ryan had already mentioned like at the beginning of the show, we had the and Juliet sign on stage, and the letters of Romeo were sort of like exploded off of the same chart that and Juliet was on and sprinkled all over the stage. But then act one, when we do see and are introduced to Romeo, like Ryan is saying, that and Juliet, big bodacious, I've used that twice, but word of the day, sign is replaced with just Romeo. So also like for the first little bit of intermission, you now see like the space that was like titled and Juliet at the top of the show, it's now titled Big Giant Just Romeo. So I had a moment, I was like, oh, we're going to get like stuff through his lens now. Or like he's going to have a way more heavier hand in this piece than I think he might have or could have. But then that's not the case. And it's not the whole intermission you're left seeing and pondering Romeo. Like they do drop a scrim, and it's a really neat, lovely visual of like music bars kind of bopping up along to the music you're hearing. Yeah, if I see this piece again, which I very well might, I think I'd pay more attention to like Romeo and Romeo's trap. Because I think that's also one thing that doesn't go in his favor is like quite literally the show is called And Juliet. Like I was hyper focused always like, okay, what's the next journey that Juliet or the like tendrils of Juliet, meaning like Angelique, April, May, like what are their stories? And then I'll get to like a Romeo and figure out what's happening, you know?
Well, while we're talking about the title, like I think it's the ampersand is what draws my attention more than the Juliet itself, because they could have just as easily called this play Juliet.
Yeah.
But by having an ampersand, a very important conjunction that implies the absence of what comes before it.
Yep.
It tells us that her story, even though the purpose of the story is to give her an afterlife that isn't about Romeo to a point, it implies that felt absence will always be there, that her story cannot be severed from his, that it'll always be tethered to him or the absence thereof. And I think, to maybe bring this up to one of the big points that I wanted to talk about in relation to the titular couple. Sorry, you want to?
Well, I just have like a very sort of like eureka moment with the and Juliet. Mm-hmm. This may be like phonetically me going too far in, but and Juliet.
Oh, that's fun. Yeah, I didn't think of that.
Anne has a heavy hand in what consideration.
No, I like that.
Consideration would not exist at all if it wasn't for Anne bumping elbows, jigging Shakespeare around to be like, you need to rethink this. So, and I think I like that it's the ampersand as opposed to the word and Juliet, because it's taking Anne's like, I don't want to put my name and my voice on this. I just want Juliet to have her own. Yeah, so this sort of and Juliet, it's like Anne is the catalyst, and then Juliet tells the story.
Okay, no, I like that. I think that's fun. But where I was going, and maybe you'll disagree with this, I'll be curious where this discussion leads, but we were talking about all the different couples. And let's talk about Juliet, not in the couple for a moment, but just as a character. She's played by Lorna Courtney in this production, who is a phenomenal performer, very like well suited to this role and does a great job in it. So don't take anything against her and what I'm about to say. Juliet, to me, was the least interesting character in this play, which is surprising because it's literally about her. It is supposed to be a reclamation of her and her life and what her story could have been, all that potential that was squandered at the end of Shakespeare's play. And I think it's just a testament to the very interesting supporting cast that was created here with all these fun side characters who I just thought were more compelling. But Juliet herself doesn't actually do a lot in this play that's ostensibly about her.
Well, a question to pop your way. is this piece supposed to be this reclamation, Juliet forefront, what she didn't get in Shakespeare? Maybe there is something to say of the piece is called Anne Juliet. This might have been how Juliet's life would be. But I think if anything, again, speaking of it in this lens, how cool is it? Again, sort of like a device shakeup, of a normal device shakeup of it kind of defies the thing of like, this is the whole world revolves around you, right? It's sort of leading into like, you're in a world and we all live in it.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting interpretation of what the ampersand might mean. It's not Romeo and Juliet, but it's April, like, May, and Juliet.
Yeah, exactly. It's friends and Juliet.
And I will charitably agree that like maybe that's what they were going for.
Yeah.
But I don't think that undercuts the idea that at its core there is still this reclamative impetus to making a play about Juliet post Romeo, and specifically that's what Anne says she's writing, or that's what she says she wants this play to be when she takes the quill away from Will.
Well, and I think to speak to that, I definitely think there were because I kind of agree with you in a sense of there were definitely moments of her like taking back her worth, realizing her worth, taking back her power, realizing her power. Like those were pivotal moments for me of like, yes, girl. Like literally you have a lot of times April being like, yes. But I agree with you in a sense of like, arc-wise, I don't think that was consistent, or there would be like explosions of thought or explosions of realization of independence and agency, but it wasn't like a journey for her.
Yeah, like her journey is
made like when those explosions happened a bit like lessened, in my opinion. Like when she was singing the song like Stronger, like I didn't feel as that like a heartbeat strength of like, yes, girl, you are stronger in this moment. And I don't think it just because like the plot itself didn't give her that arc to be like, oh, I can feel that you're stronger.
This is exactly where I'm going with it. Every big development in her story felt unearned, and like which is a shame because even if like I'm all for supporting the side characters, I liked them most of all, but like at the end of the day, if we don't really get that oomph of yes, you're gonna hear me roar, like, well, what are you roaring at? You haven't really gone through, if most of the struggles that you're responding to all happened in another play that we're not attending right now.
Well, and I think that now kind of opens a can of worms too of like, what does it mean when you do bleed the A plot, B plot too much? Or, where do you find or where do you draw the line of that balance? Because I loved, and like you were saying, that side characters were actually more augmented than Anne Juliet in most of the moments. But then, right, if we're left with, this is kind of just like Anne Juliet aside, just like a protagonist discussion. If we're left without that sort of paved arc of the character we're supposed to follow, like, is that okay? Is that like, what are, like, is that saying something, or is that causing like just an awkward sort of tension that could have easily be ironed out by just giving her more of an arc? Like, I don't know, I guess.
Like, and it's not uncommon for side characters to steal the show and draw attention away. Like, to look at Shakespeare himself, that's basically what happened with Falstaff so much that they wrote a Falstaff play, like give that guy his own play. But like you can look at Donkey from Shrek or the freaking Minions who now have kind of taken over their own story, but like if we want to like go more contemporary frames of reference, like, and I don't think it's bad that I found these side characters so compelling. It was more invested in their stories, and it was May singing a power ballad that finally started to get me on board with the enterprise of this show. But yeah, at the end of the day, if I actually just look at Juliet in isolation for what journey does she go on, it just feels a little lackluster, which I really don't feel like that should be my thought coming out of a play called Anne Juliet. And
covered with glitter and sparkle, and the lackluster is the vibe we shouldn't be getting.
I'm happy for her that she seems happy with the journey she went on, that she didn't have to needlessly struggle. Like, I don't want us like, oh, you needed to struggle more to get But like at the end of the day, it just kind of felt like she went to Paris, had fun with her friends, thought about marrying one guy, her ex came back, she decided she doesn't need no man, but maybe she will see where things go if she and her ex try again, but slower this time. Like, it's not a very exciting journey when you kind of break it down with pure beats.
Well, and I think it goes back to what we've already discussed too, of like, if it was to be more like, this is my life, but I'm actually going to like spend like my time in the spotlight augmenting those around me and supporting those around me, then again, I would have liked that collective, all-encompassing, we're all in this together kind of vibe at the end of the show. You know, like that acknowledgement of, and I guess in a way it was, but the way that it was that we're singing 90s or aughts music that we all sitting in this theater know and love and vibe. So that's enough to know that we're all in this together. But remember, like, those songs in this medium were used as devices to help tell the story. So if at the end the songs take precedence over the story's resolve, then it leaves a bit of like an unresolved feeling in me. And now I think, going full circle, I think you could say that about a lot of jukebox musicals, right? Where the music hammers home more than the plot does.
And at the end of the day, most of the songs, like, from this period, they're all pretty, like, you know, individualistic and ballady and me. So, like, they're not going to necessarily bring about this collectivity that we're maybe hoping for, or wish we could have seen instead. But you know what does, and this might be the note we have to end on, because it's also where we started.
This review is becoming about as long as this show is, but yeah.
We're six. Oh, we're six. That's a story that kind of looks like it's starting off as like, oh, these are the 6 wives. Who's your favorite? Who was the best one? And then ends with, hey, women, let's not fight with each other because we're all on the same side. Let's start a band and be awesome. And isn't that what this play should have been about all along?
Right.
And, like, I don't fault Aunt Juliet for not stealing the ending from the thing that we're all already going to compare it to anyway.
Yeah.
But like, that's maybe the ending we're saying we would have liked to see here, and just also go see 6, because 6 is great.
Yeah, but also please see Aunt Juliet, because I know even before Aunt Juliet and 6 were, as lifted as they are right now when this recording goes out, Aunt Juliet has and will be the little sister and shadow piece to 6, just because
of, like, they're both very good.
Yeah, but this, and so like, my heart goes Aunt Juliet, and they are different in a way, but they are quite similar in a sense too. And so, like, and you know what? And for our Toronto listeners and viewers too, Aunt Juliet is just down the road or in your backyard. So, Ryan, do you have any final thoughts before we kind of wrap up?
I feel like I'm good if you are.
Yes. So, realizing that Ryan and I did our usual, like, deep dive dramaturgical nitpicky, I feel like we're potentially leaving the review on like a little bit less of a shiny verb vibe that we started. So I kind of want to bring that back, because
the show's really good. Go see it.
It really is good. And you know that it's good because of how much we've literally spent time talking it out and realizing what it is and what it's not. And one of the beautiful things of theater and art is that everyone will have their own opinion. Every story will resolve a different way for different folks, different people. This show does that in spades. It does it in so many layers. And just because we didn't agree with something, you might totally agree. And that's also what makes what we do. We discuss art because there's never an end to what we can chat about.
In the comments if you disagree. Keep this conversation going.
Yeah. So again, huge shout out to the cast and crew for putting on a phenomenal performance. And again, I mean, I feel like we're on our stages again. But there still is that, as like artists and audience goers, like, we're getting our feet wet again, right? We're getting back. And this was just a wonderful explosion, pizzazz of like stunning music. And again, I kept saying to Ryan too, like, the performers on stage are having the time of their lives. And there's nothing better than watching as an audience member, and also an audience member who does theater themselves, knowing that, like, fellow colleagues are just living their best damn lives. And Juliet does that for everyone on stage. So that's so beautiful to see. See this show and Juliet. It is happening at Princess of Wales Theatre from now until August 14, 2022. Okay, that clocks us out. So we'll raise our glasses one last time, do a little cheers. And before we leave too, I'll plug as usual. Go ahead, if you're listening to us on a podcast, perhaps, go ahead and subscribe, follow Cup of Hemlock Theatre. If you're watching on YouTube, go ahead and subscribe. Like Ryan said, drop in the comments, like, tell your friends. Go ahead to our social media pages, Cup of Hemlock Theatre. Ryan, do you want to plug yourself at all, or just send all that love?
I never do. You know I never do.
Nice.
Just follow Cup of Hemlock if you care about me. Literally all I share on the one social media I'm even a little active on are just these videos when they come out, so you're not missing much.
Amazing. If you'd like to keep up with me and my busy summer, you can go ahead and follow my Instagram account at Jillian .Robinson96. Yeah, there's some Shakespeare.
You're also in a subversively feminist queer Shakespeare piece coming up, aren't you?
Yes, I am. I will be playing Olivia in Twelfth Night at the Gravenhurst Wharf, directed by the phenomenal Autumn Smith. Yeah, and it is an adaptation placed in Gravenhurst post World War I is where our story takes place. And I play Olivia, who is a suffragette and also takes over her family's lumber mill business. So I'm very excited to unpack that. And the ending is different than what you have read in your anthologies, perhaps.
Kind of like the play we just reviewed.
Oh, exactly. And down the line, in the middle of July, I'll be off to Calgary for Calgary Fringe. I am performing in a new musical called Flash, written by, which you've seen them on our channels recently, written by Katie Miller and Steve John Dale. So keep your eyes peeled for my socials for that if you're interested. But yes, send all the love to Cup of Hemlock Theatre. Stay safe, folks. Stay hydrated. It's quite warm out there. Cheers one more time, and we will see you next time. Bye.